got to see this week.
I understand.
But thank you very much for that, yes.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yes.
As Your Lordship pleases. Your Lordship, before we call the next witness, we would also like to put up certain exhibits. My Lord, yesterday we handed up the Department of Justice file in respect of Professor Kantalal Naik, and I undertook to Your Lordship to provide you with a paginated and indexed copy of that file, and we have such a copy for you. I believe this would be, is it G3? Yes, we hand it up as G3, so you can simply replace this paginated version as your fresh copy of G3.
Is it legible? Is that?
It is legible. It is a much better copy.
Yes. Thank you very much. That's G3.
My Lord, we would also like to hand up two further Department of Justice files dealing with Mohammed Timol, who testified yesterday, as well as Dilshad Jethan, who will be testifying this morning. And I believe that the exhibit numbers for these two documents, in respect of Mohammed Timol, that could be G4, and the file in respect of Jethan could be G5.
Thank you.
And both of those have also been paginated and indexed. My Lord, one final housekeeping matter before we commence.
Yeah, just a minute. I want to make sure they are marked correctly. This one has to do with. This is for Mr. Mohammed Timol, right?
Yes.
You said it's
G4.
G4. And the other one will be G5.
For Dilshad Jethan will be G5.
Yes. Yes. You were saying in regard to housekeeping?
Given that the next witness will be describing her visit to John Vorster Square, you might recall that she was the second witness that did a certain pointing out on the 9th and 10th floors.
Yes.
Your Lordship, I just want to bring to your attention that there are floor plans, they're called sketch plans, that are attached to the back of volume F. That's the photograph album compiled by Warrant Officer Kruger. The front cover has this SAPS emblem on it, and there are helpful floor plans that are attached to the back of that document.
Are they numbered?
It's not. It doesn't have a specific number, but it's the last two documents that fold out at the back of volume F.
Yes, sketch plan.
They're sketch plans. The first one is the 9th floor, and the second one is the 10th floor.
Okay.
And Your Lordship may want to have reference to it as the witness testifies.
Will the witness be able to refer us to these sketch plans?
The witness has not as yet been supplied with these sketch plans, Your Lordship,
Okay.
and as matters stand, we hadn't intended to give her a copy, although we could if the need arises.
Yes, I recall that she was with us there, and she pointed out with reference to certain features in the building.
Yes.
Yes. Before you call the witness, I noticed that the counsel for the police is here, and she may want to give us an update. Yes, ma'am. Is there a need for me to make an order to that effect?
They request the order that they come in, and then they will comply with the order.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'll do that now. Having regard to the fact that this court yesterday authorized the issue of subpoenas to members of the police who were present during the interrogation of Mr. Timol, I make the following order. One, that the commissioner is ordered to direct members of the South African police who may be available to assist Captain Nell in the investigation and location of the police who have to be served with the subpoenas. And further, that the commissioner is ordered to direct the state attorney to make available legal assistance to the police or former police who have been subpoenaed, to the extent that they may require such assistance. That is the order.
As the court pleases.
I don't know how long it will take to transcribe it, but it can be reduced to writing, and then I will sign it today before we leave here. And I've just authorized the subpoenas. Yes, they are ready. They are ready to be served. Yes, Mr. Vani, let's proceed.
As the court pleases. My Lord, just to advise you that we have consulted with this witness, and although she said she was feeling claustrophobic at the time of the inspection, she has no objections to the cameras being present in court today.
Yes, we'll appreciate that.
Please approach the witness box, Ms. Jotham.
Your full name and surname?
Jeto.
Do you have any objection in taking the oath?
No, none whatsoever.
Do you swear that the evidence that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
It is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing is the truth as I remember it.
Please raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me Lord.
Thank you. Ma'am, you are welcome to sit down if you want to.
I prefer to stand.
You prefer to stand. Then just shift nearer to the microphone there. This one, the one that is on. That microphone that is on, yes. Yes, thank you very much. You may proceed.
Thank you, my Lord. Dr. Jetham, firstly, thank you for agreeing to testify this morning and to revisit certain experiences that you had to endure back in 1971. Dr. Jetham, could you tell us a bit about yourself and what you are currently doing in terms of your profession?
I'm an adult female. I am a cardiologist by profession. I stopped practicing as what is known as invasive cardiology a while ago, but I still practice as a specialist physician, mostly on a pro bono basis. Apart from that, I'm a family person and still very involved in the community in a social sense and doing a lot of charity work. That is how I spend a lot of my time.
Thank you. And Dr. Jetham, have you made out an affidavit for purposes of assisting this court in its inquiries?
Yes, I have. I have my lawyer.
And do you have a copy of that affidavit with you?
I have a copy of it in front of me.
My Lord, Dr. Jetham's affidavit is in volume C at page 90.
91, yes. Yeah. 90, yes.
Yeah.
Page 90, yes.
Dr. Jetham, by way of some background, can you describe how is it that you were able to encounter Ahmed Timol as well as Salim Essop?
My Lord, I was raised in a town called Rudaput, which is on the West Rand. We all, Ahmed Timol included, and Salim Essop, lived very close by. Ahmed Timol and I lived in the same street, about just over 2 blocks apart. He was somewhat older than me, and in the early stages, because he was so much older than me, I didn't really know him. However, in grade 10, he became my history teacher, and I got to know him exceptionally well at that time. After I left grade 10, I'm not sure what happened to Ahmed Timol in terms of his career and where he went to. We met up again when I became a student at the University College for Indians at Salisbury Island, which he visited because many of our mutual friends were there at that stage. I also knew him very well because of the fact that the Desai family of Rudaput were close friends of both of us. They had children, some his age and some my age. So we often met at the home of Mrs. Amina Desai. As far as Salim Essop goes, Salim Essop and I went to school together. We started off school together, but we didn't matriculate together for various reasons. I then lost touch with him for a couple of years whilst he was admitted to Wits University, and I wasn't, as mentioned before. I was at the Tribal College at Salisbury Island in Durban Bay. I met Salim again when I was readmitted to Wits University. Well, not readmitted, I was admitted to Wits University as a medical student in 1971. He was a year ahead of me at medical school, but we often met in what was known as the common room, where we had tea, coffee, played things like table tennis in our spare time. And up till the fateful day of the 23rd of October, that is as I knew the two of them.
Thank you, Doctor. Were you ever part of the underground activities of either Ahmed Timol or Salim Essop?
As far as Salim Essop goes, I wasn't even aware that he was, if at all, involved in any underground activities. because Salim had his own group of friends at medical school. I had my own group of friends. And at that stage, as I've mentioned, we had already lost touch for a couple of years, whilst I was in Durban and he was in Johannesburg. So I hadn't a clue. As far as Ahmed Timol was concerned, there was mention now and then, because whilst he was my history teacher in grade 10, he was extremely passionate about the European revolutions, such as the French Revolution, the history of Italy, and so on. And then when I met him again at the Desai home, I kind of picked up a few words here and there, but the extent of his involvement I was not aware of. But I was aware that he was somehow involved in some form of politics. I myself was not involved with any of those politics at that stage.
So you were never formally recruited into any underground unit?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Can you now describe to the court how it was that you got to be arrested on that fateful day of Saturday, 23rd October 1971?
The whole of 1971, I was what I would describe as living my dream, because my dream was to be at Wits as a medical student and to graduate as a doctor, my lord, from Wits University, which was then a very, very prestigious university. My whole involvement that year was medical school, my friends. I've always been a very, what I would like to say, a social person, so I had lots of friends. On the 23rd, which was of October, which was a Saturday, it was the 3rd of Ramadan, which is the fasting month for the Muslims. I had been fasting, and it was the day that the university closed for students to go home for about 2 weeks and prepare for the final exams for that year. I came home at around between 4:35 in my car, which I will mention a bit later what car I owned and what car I drove at the time. In front of our house in Rudaput, my dad was waiting for me, and there were 2 white men waiting in plain clothes. As I approached our gate, my dad said to me, "These men are here to look for you," or something to that effect. I can't remember the exact words. And the men introduced themselves as from the special branch. Of course, like everybody else at that time, I knew who and what the special branch was. I was quite shocked. Why would the special branch be looking for me? I'm not involved in anything that concerns the special branch. When I asked them why it was that they were interested in me, they said they wanted to take me away. They didn't say where to ask me a few questions concerning my activities. I said I wasn't involved in any activities, and then they told me, "You are a communist, and we need to ask you questions about that." I can't remember details after that, but I was put into a car whose make or anything I have no recollection of, because I was in an absolute state of shock that I could have been picked up, as a communist when I wasn't a communist or involved in politics. I found myself in the basement of John Foster Square. What I later discovered was there was a tunnel there. I was taken up in a lift. Should I continue from there?
Yes, you were taken up in a lift, and where did you go?
I was taken up in a lift by the same 2 people that had picked me up at home and taken into an office and introduced to a man as Colonel Greyler.
Can we just pause there for a moment? Do you recall what floor that was in the building?
That was the 9th floor.
And can you advise the court, or let me remind you that you were present at an inspection in Loco on Tuesday afternoon. Did you point out to his lordship that particular office?
My Lord, as you will recall, I wasn't 100% sure which office it was, but I did point out that it was one of the 3 offices there, and I described the office to my Lord.
Thank you. And please continue. What transpired in that office?
I was then left there in the presence of Colonel Greyling and asked, well, I was given a pad of paper, the kind one uses at college to write on, and a pen. And I was asked to write my life history on it, who I was, where I was from, and more particularly, who my friends were, and, of course, my political activities. I protested that I had nothing to say about political activities because at that stage, I was not involved in any politics. I was asked to write these things down anyway. I wrote what I thought they wanted to hear and passed the paper on after a while. It might have been more than 1 page, I don't recall, to Colonel Greyling, who read it, crumpled it up, threw it into a waste paper basket, and very angrily told me they were all lies. Asked me to write again. This procedure was repeated several times. I do not, at this stage, recall how many times. Eventually, I think Colonel Greyling lost his patience with me, called me a liar, not a lawyer, I beg your pardon, and asked me, was I aware that my boyfriends were in the other offices somewhere along the line. I didn't understand what he meant by, the word my boyfriends were there. But I didn't ask what he meant by my boyfriends. Anyway, I'm not sure how it happened that I cannot remember. Did you use the telephone? Did you use some other means? But 2 men then appeared.
After how long?
I do not recall. It was, no. What I do recall is that I heard the call to prayer at that time, which would have been around 6-ish. And when I was taken away from my home, my mum had packed some food for me to break my fast with because, as mentioned earlier, my Lord, I had been in a fasting state. And I remember breaking my fast there with the food that my mum had provided. And I was then taken away on Tuesday when I was there at John Foster Square. I just could not recall how I got to the 10th floor. Was I taken in the lift? Was I taken on the steps? I just cannot recall. But I was taken to a 10th floor office by these 2 men.
And Dr. Jotham, if I can ask you again to cast your mind back to Tuesday afternoon with the inspection. You were asked to take us up to the 10th floor, and you were asked to point out approximately where you were taken to. Could you describe the officers that you pointed out to the court?
My Lord, I would like to remind everybody that since 1971, I have never been back to the 10th floor. I have been back to John Foster Square, but to the charge office to report minor traffic incidents that I had to report, but never to the 10th floor. When I got to the 10th floor, it was up the stairs, down the corridor, and I was a little bit disorientated. I tried to figure my way around, and I kept on saying, if I can find that lift, because I needed to orientate myself in terms of the lift, that if I knew where the lift was, I could orientate myself. Once I spotted where the lift might be behind the door, and I opened the door and I found the lifts. The next thing I needed to find was something that later played a prominent part in my incarceration, and at this stage I will use the word torture, on the 10th floor. was a toilet. And I just knew that if I could find that toilet, I would know exactly my orientation on that whole floor, where I was and the events, where the events had taken place. I walked around. At this stage, I was quite traumatized, but I found the toilet. The toilet wasn't exactly as I had remembered it 45 years ago, but then it is 45 years ago. But once I found the toilet, I immediately knew that if I turned around that corner and then turned right, that would be the office in which I was interrogated and tortured.
And Doctor, did you point out the toilet to His Lordship at the inspection?
Yes, I remember pointing out the toilet to Your Lordship.
Are you saying that if I understand your evidence well, as you come out of the toilet that you pointed out, the first door would be that office in which you were kept, or would it be further down the passage?
No, it would be further down the passage, just round the corner, and then along the passage.
But you could not point out which particular office it was. If I recall, you said it's one of these offices.
Yes, one of the two there.
Yes. And for the record, these offices were 1025, 1026, thereabout, and 1027, if I recall, in that vicinity.
That's correct, Your Lordship. If Your Lordship will recall, there were two offices that were open. That was 1025, which also happened to be the office with a vault in it, and 1026. But regrettably, the other offices, 1027 and further to the right, were locked.
They were locked, yes. But she pointed out it was in that vicinity.
Yeah, I think the word she used was adjacent to the right-hand side.
Okay, thank you very much. You can proceed.
Just
you want to add something?
Yes. My Lord, somebody mentioned there, I now do not recall whether it was my Lord or it was Mr. Vani, that there is in fact another toilet around there. And I said, no, it wasn't the other toilet. It was the toilet I had already pointed out. And then I asked about the door that was closed. And after that, I pointed out that I'm pretty certain that that office I pointed out was the one I had been in. Because I didn't recall going through the other door, nor do I recall any other toilet there. The toilet where, I will mention later what happened in that toilet, was the one that whatever happened, happened, and the one that I had been looking for to orientate myself.
Thank you, Doctor. You may proceed. So you were taken to an office in that vicinity, and I think you have given the court a good idea as to its location and what transpired there.
Are we now going back to the time when I was up there,
yes,
not Tuesday?
We're now going back to the 23rd of October 1971.
Okay. My Lord, I must point out that on Tuesday when I saw that office, I did point out that certain things had changed there in that office, like the tiles were no longer there, that had been there originally. And that's important as I go along in terms of my testimony. The other thing is that partition that was there was not the one that I saw on Tuesday. It was frosted glass.
Yes. So when you say partition, you really mean that the glass
yes
was of a different
yes
make.
yes
It was more frosted.
It was frosted and I could not see through that glass, whereas on Tuesday when we were there I could see through that glass. I couldn't make out forms, but I mean I could tell, that there were people on the other side or something like that, whereas 45 years ago it was frosted glass. And there was,
it was opaque. You couldn't see,
yes, opaque.
You couldn't see even
No,
the figures behind it.
No. I could hear, but I couldn't see. When I arrived in that office, Initially, they gave me a chair to sit on. And they told me, since I wasn't going to be writing the truth, they had to somehow get the truth out of me. There were two men. At this point, I'd like to add that throughout my ordeal, there were always two white male officers with me. At certain points in the next few days, one or other officer, and they were not the same officers, they worked by shifts. Never was I left alone by myself. There were times when one officer left the room for reasons I'll mention shortly, but the other one was always there. I was never left on my own.
Dr. Jetton, do you perhaps recall the names of the first two officers who interrogated you?
I do not recall any names whatsoever. At this point, I'd just like to mention, somewhere along the line, I can't remember on which shift, exactly on which day, a man with a very red face and freckles on his hands was one of the interrogating officers. And I was told previously by a friend that if ever I had the misfortune to be at John Foster Square, the person didn't mean in terms of politics, that I had to beware of a man with freckles on his hands. And that man's name was Swanepoel. I don't remember his rank at all. That's the only one that I remember. And much, much later, after a whole lot of things happened, I remember another name, Patu. But Patu was not involved in my interrogation at that stage at all. The officers involved in my interrogation, I do not know their names, and I don't think I ever actually knew their names.
If you were presented with photographs, do you think you might be able to recognize any?
I don't think so. I don't think so. May I explain why?
Yes.
My Lord, I have a problem, which is a medical thing that some people are born with, that until I get to know a person quite well, I do not recognize, there's a medical term for it. It's called facial recognition deficiency. I have that. So even on social basis, if I meet people, if I meet them very briefly or not on a significant level, if I met that person again, say in a shopping center, and the person said hi, I would struggle to put that person in perspective. And this would go on until I actually got to know the person quite well. Perhaps it's because of that particular deficiency that I have that I am very good at recognizing voices. And I know voices very well. Perhaps it's a form of compensation that if I cannot recognize your face, my Lord, at least when I've listened to you, if I hear you again, I'd know that voice. And at some stage, I'll be able to eventually put a face to that voice. And for that reason, I would not be able to recognize anybody from that time except Patu, because I spent a lot of time with Patu.
Thank you, Doctor. Let's return to the commencement of your interrogation on the 10th floor.
Okay. Already, when I was taken to the 10th floor and put into that office, there was a lot of aggression. I must admit, from my part, I was very angry because it was, the study break. I wanted to go home because this is what I was told. We're going to ask you a few questions. I wasn't told I was being arrested or anything like that. And I had spoken what I knew to be the truth, that I was not involved in any way, that I knew nothing about. Up to this point, the names Teimol and Essop were not mentioned to me. It was only in that office on the 10th floor that I was asked about these so-called boyfriends of mine that had been mentioned earlier by Greyler, that they were in fact referring to Essop and Timol, to which of course I screamed that they were my friends, I knew them, we lived in the same town, etc., but they were not my boyfriends, which they were not. After that, I was asked questions about them. Words were being attempted to be put into my mouth, which I knew not to be true. As I became more aggressive, they became more aggressive. I became aggressive verbally in that my denials, that you guys are lying. This isn't true. You know, I know nothing about this. At some point, the one said to the other, that was the first time I heard them speak Afrikaans in front of me, "Sy is parmantig." And the next thing I knew is that I had a terrible smack on my face. As I reeled from that smack, more and more rained down on me. The questioning went on.
With an open hand?
Yes, with an open hand. With an open hand. And it I think I had drank water when I broke my fast in Greling's office. I needed to relieve myself. And I asked to go to the bathroom. They wouldn't let me. I still feel the pain. I still feel the humiliation. I still feel awful when I think of urine running down my legs. Here I was, a decently brought up young lady at medical school, and this happening to me. It was humiliating. They thought this was a huge joke. They mocked at me, they laughed at me. Somewhere along the line, they picked up just how horribly humiliated I was by this. They then decided to use that as a ploy. They brought water in a jug, a glass jug, and a glass tumbler. And every now and then, I was asked to finish that jug of water. Needless to say, what went in the top end came down the bottom end. And the whole situation just became more and more humiliating, until I was standing in a puddle of my own urine. And they were jeering at me all the time. Somewhere along the line, in the course of that evening, they brought a bucket because they said I was messing the floor too much. This is the reason why the importance of the fact that they were not those tiles that we saw on Tuesday in that office. They were the Mali tiles. I was then standing in a bucket of my own urine. Eventually, that bucket was taken away. I was given a mop. I was asked to clean the floor myself. The interrogations and the beatings went on. I was exhausted.
Can I just check, Doctor? Both your interrogators and indeed at all times they were men.
They were always men, coincidentally or otherwise. They were always Afrikaans-speaking people. Always Afrikaans-speaking people. Because they either spoke Afrikaans in my presence to each other, or somewhere along the line, when they realized that I was also, I could speak Afrikaans. I'm English-speaking, but that I could speak Afrikaans. Now and then, they threw jibes at me in Afrikaans. And the word parmantig came up many times. That it was because of my being parmantig that they had to deal with me in the manner in which they did.
Now, throughout that session, was there a female police officer who came in?
No. The first time I came into contact with a female was several days later when I was taken to a cell. That was the first time I came in contact with a female officer. These interrogations continued right through the night. I heard the call to prayer from the Hamidia Mosque, which I know very well since childhood. And I knew it was morning because it became important to me afterwards, that call to prayer. because the morning call to prayer has an added phrase in it as compared to the other calls to prayer during the day. That phrase is, prayer is better than sleep. So I knew that morning had arrived because morning is the only time that the Muazzin actually used that phrase.
So this is now Sunday morning, the
Sunday
24th
morning.
of October.
Sunday morning. And at that stage, I was still somewhere swimming in my own urine, getting these slaps across the face, being asked questions. By now, I knew that many people whom I knew very well, from my childhood, from my school, from Salisbury Island, wherever, were in fact detained somewhere along the line because names were thrown at me. So you did this with this one, or you did that with that one, or you went there with that one, none of which was true. None of the people that was mentioned.
And in the course of that conversation,
Part of the interrogation.
did they make mention of the fact that there are some of them who are detained?
No.
Or you just concluded?
No. The reason I knew that those people were there, as an example, I had a friend called Fatima. She used to be called Fats for short, not because she was fat. They asked me, so you went to this meeting with Fats. Now, how did they know that I called her Fats? So each time they used to leave every now and then and come back and, well, Fats says this about you. Or another time they would come back, whichever one left the room would come back and say, oh, Shirley says this about you. And this is what Shirley says you did. So I kind of figured out that Shirley was there, Fats was there, Kanti was there, and a whole host of other people, because their names were bandied about. And each time one of those interrogators left, they came back with a name and information. So I figured out these people must be there. Not much was said about Timol or Essop at that stage.
Doctor, if I can just ask you to pause for a moment. You've mentioned three names, Fats, Shirley, and a third name. Perhaps you can supply the court with their full names.
Shirley was Shireen Arif. We were best friends at Salisbury Island. Never involved in any political activities, either together or to my knowledge, nor was Shirley ever involved. She was called Shirley, but her name is Shireen Arif. Fats was Fatima Wadi, who is now a retired dentist. We were at Salisbury Island together.
What was that surname?
Wadi, W-A-D-E-E. We were at Salisbury Island together. And Kanti was a maths tutor. His full name is Kantilal Naik.
And how do you spell Kantilal?
I think it's K-A-N-T-I-L-A-L.
Kantilal Naik.
And the Naik is N-A-I-K. He was my maths tutor from high school in Rudaput. He didn't teach at Rudaput school, he was my tutor. There were several other names mentioned that I don't recall, but these were the prominent ones, particularly Shirley and Fats, because we had been very close friends. It was next day that something else started happening, apart from the slaps in the face and the excessive drinking of the water. So obviously I was no longer in a state of fasting because all that water was going down.
When you say the next day, are you still talking about Sunday the 24th?
Now we are on Sunday.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're on Sunday. Initially I was sat down on a chair and then I was made to stand. A device which eventually when I became a doctor, I learned is used to measure your pulse. Well, the devices look similar, but obviously when a doctor measures your pulse, you don't get electrocuted. It's just something that measures your pulse. Anyway, the device was very similar. There was one put onto each of my index fingers, and I was electrocuted. Repeatedly. It was at this point, somewhere along the line, I'm not sure which came first. Did Timol and Essop come in first, or did the electrocution come first? But they kind of happened at about that time. And I continued to deny, my lord, all the accusations that were being made about things that Timol is supposed to have done, and about the time, oh, but you were there in the Desai household, and so on and so forth. Yes, I was there in the Desai household, but not doing the things you say I was doing. I was doing something else, like chatting to Mrs. Desai's daughter, or reading a book, or something like that. Not doing the things that Essop didn't feature in the Desai household. Either in reality, I never had any interaction with Salim Essop in the Desai household, nor did it feature in the interrogation. It was about Timol. At some point in time, I think I might have passed out because I found myself on the floor.
Do you have a recollection of...
In that office.
Oh.
I was exhausted by now, the electrocutions.
Do you have a recollection as to how long the electrical torture treatment carried on for?
I can't recall. But then I was told something about telling them about bucket bombs. I had never heard that word up to that point in my life. I had no idea what a bucket bomb was. They explained to me what a bucket bomb was. And I kept telling myself, through all that pain, through all that agony, through everything, girl, watch out. These people are trying to put words in your mouth. You don't even know what a bucket bomb is, and here they are talking about a bucket bomb. They explained to me what a bucket bomb is. May I explain to my lord what they told me a bucket bomb was? Yes. They explained to me that Teimol was busy making bombs out of plastic buckets, in which there were pamphlets of a subversive nature, asking people to overthrow the then government and convert the country to communism. And that when that bomb was set off, the pamphlets were distributed through the air for anyone to pick up and read. That's what I was told a bucket bomb was. To this day, I have no idea what a bucket bomb really is. Anyway, after that, when I still went on, you know, at this point, I think I know myself. I'm not proud of it. But I must have become a lot more aggressive, being very tired, very exhausted, in a great deal of pain, hungry, lack of sleep. Now I was put onto a chair and told that she's very tired now, it's time for a massage. Pads were applied to my shoulder blades for the so-called massage.
Was that directly to your skin?
Directly to my skin, underneath my dress. This was a more severe form of electrocution. A much, much more severe form. To this day, I sometimes ask myself, how did I survive that? How is it that I didn't scream? I'm not the kind of person who screams. I'm not the kind of person who cries very easily. It's just the way I am. There's nothing good about it, my lord. There's nothing bad about it. It's just the way I am. But it was horrible. This went on for a long period of time. The day went by, all these accusations were made about Essop, about Teimol. Somewhere along the line on that day, an attempt at blackmailing me was made. At that time, Salim Essop was very keen on photography. And I had at some stage modeled for him, but fully clothed. They claimed that they had pictures of me in the nude taken by Salim. I realized they must have raided Salim's home as they had raided my home. But I knew for a certainty there was no such thing as nude photos of me, because I had never posed in the nude for Salim. I had posed, yes, but not in the nude. All kinds of attempts were made at blackmailing me. That day went by. The next day, more and more of the same went by, except that now the forced drinking of water had stopped, and I was now allowed to go to the bathroom. Hence the importance of that toilet that I was looking for, because I was no longer allowed to sit. The only time that I actually sat was when I crumbled down to the floor, literally crumbled down to the floor. And I discovered that if I said I needed to, go and wee, I would be allowed to go to the bathroom, to the toilet. I took that opportunity when I went to that bathroom that I pointed out on Tuesday afternoon, just to lay on that floor for a very short period of time, until I heard a bang on the door each time I went to the toilet, that am I not finished yet? That was the importance of that toilet, that I actually used it just to lie down and get my muscles realigned or whatever.
Doctor, are we still on Sunday, 24th of October?
I think all this kind of just merges into Sunday and then Monday. In all this time, I could hear a lot of voices around me, of some voices that I recognized. For instance, at some point, I did recognize the lady I called Fats. I recognized her voice, but she was crying. She had passed our office, so they had been taking her somewhere. I think it was on that Monday that a new voice I recognized in the office next door to me, that if we were facing the office as I pointed it out, it would be the office on my left. If indeed I'm 100% correct about the office I was in. But in any case, that office was to my left. So long as it is humanly possible, my Lord, to be sure without actually seeing what you are seeing, which is why I mentioned earlier about this problem I have with facial recognition and the fact that I know voices. I recognize people's voices. I recognize the voice coming from that office as being that of Ahmed Timol. And I'm reasonably certain that Ahmed Timol was being interrogated in that office at least from the Monday onwards. The office next door to me, and we were separated by just that partition with the frosted glass. And I think it's called dry wall at the bottom. It wasn't all glass. And it's still more or less similar except for the kind of glass that is there. The interrogations continued. On my side, the smacks continued, the lies continued, the accusations continued, my denials continued, not very polite denials on my part, my Lord. At some point, I was so fed up, so exhausted, so almost, for want of a better word, finished, that I eventually said to them to leave me alone, to go out of there and do their own homework properly first. Because they accused me of being at political meetings in Durban, and the time given to me was a time that I was in fact hospitalized with a sporting injury to my spine. And I told them, go back to Shifa Hospital and check. You'll find that I was in traction. No, when you're in traction, you are completely bandaged up with weights coming down from your legs that was to straighten your spine. There's no way that I could have been in hospital at that state. But then I remembered that was the time that I had lent my car to friends. And it would appear that Ahmed Timol was one of them that had been in that car, and I thought they had gone to a party, social outings with my car. I have no idea where they went to. I'm being told, or I was being told, that they had been to political meetings. I have no idea.
Doctor, can we just establish, you've testified that you heard the voice of Ahmed Timol. Can you tell the court approximately when, the first time that you heard Timol's voice?
I can't be 100% sure, but it wasn't the night I was taken to that office for the first time from Preeling's office. It wasn't on the Sunday. I think it was on the Monday.
Would it have been early Monday?
My Lord, I cannot recall. But it was the Monday. Because in the evenings, that place was very quiet, remembering that John Foster Square abuts on the double-decker. But at that time, there wasn't much traffic on the double-decker as compared to now. And the evenings were very quiet. But it was definitely that Monday.
And can you describe the nature of what you heard?
Okay. On the Monday, there was a lot of screaming. There was a lot of protesting. But I couldn't actually make out distinctly what was being said. At no stage could I make out what was being said. Because, to remind my Lord, I myself was being interrogated at that time. I myself was being, repeatedly, the smacks continued all the time. And threats were being made against me. When it really became quite vicious was, I think, on that Tuesday night. Because this went on throughout the whole of Tuesday. Every now and then, as mentioned earlier, one of the interrogators would leave the office and they'd come back. And then they came to tell me that I was in the car in which Timol and Essop had been distributing pamphlets. I, of course, had no idea whether Timol and Essop were in fact distributing pamphlets. And I went to pains to describe to them that Timol was at that time using Mrs. Desai's car, which was a Ford Anglia, a pale yellow in color. I drove a Ford Anglia, perhaps a slightly newer model, which was white in color. Both the registration numbers, we lived in Roodepoort, so the registration number at that time began with TU. And the registration numbers were very similar. Just a coincidence, because there weren't many cars around at that time. So it was after that when they left the office and came back and told me, but Timol says it was your car. But I had never lent my car to Timol, and I had never been either in my car or in Mrs. Desai's car with Timol. My last meeting with Timol in 1971 was when I was already at WITS as a medical student. I had gone to visit Mrs. Desai one afternoon, just to visit, because we had been close friends. Her son had been at school with me. Her daughter Bahia had been a very close friend of mine. I just went to say, hi, how do you do? Timol was there. We got into a conversation of no significance whatsoever. And Mrs. Desai was a very, very hospitable lady. There was always lunch. There were always cookies around. She asked me to stay for lunch, which wasn't unusual. Whoever was at the Desai home always stayed for lunch. It's the way Mrs. Desai was. And we had a very nice lunch with a very nice chit-chat and I left after that. That was the last time. This would have been round about June, because it was vacation time for me from WITS. That was the last time I actually physically saw Ahmed Timol.
If we can return to Monday the 25th of October, you've testified that for the first time you were allowed to sit on a chair, but that the electric torture and the assaults had stopped. In your statement, you say that you were asked by your interrogators whether you knew what was happening to the other people in the building.
Yes.
What was your response?
I didn't reply to that because I guessed the same that was happening to me, or something similar to what was happening to me, was happening to them. But by now, I knew better than to stop what they called this parmantig thing. I think I was just too exhausted. And, continuous lies. Every now and then, a statement was produced to me. Teimol says this, Essop says this, Desai says this one says that, names were just bandied around, my lord, and the statements were shown to me. Well, I didn't actually read the statements, but papers were thrust at me. No way could those statements have been made by those people, I thought, because there wasn't a shred of truth in it. As mentioned earlier, that I was in a car distributing pamphlets with Essop and Timol. It didn't happen. Never at any stage was I in the Anglia owned by the Desais, driven by Timol. I was always in my own Anglia. It didn't happen. And at no stage had Timol and Essop ever traveled with me in my Anglia. It just didn't happen.
And so, Doctor, this continued through the course of Monday
and on Tuesday.
Through to Tuesday. Can I just check, they're still not allowing you to sleep?
No. I must have dozed off and passed out, because it's humanly impossible not to pass out after that length of time. And as I said, those few minutes breaks that I continually, well, not continually, but now and then when I was allowed to go to the bathroom, that I lay on that floor. But it wasn't long. It must have been a minute or two until they banged on that floor. It was on the Tuesday evening that the screams from the next door office became particularly vicious and unbearable. And I thought to myself, after what was being done to me, I wonder what's happening to what I thought was Ahmed Timol in the next office.
Can we just check in terms of the timing? Because Tuesday late afternoon, you said in your statement that you were taken for a cold shower to a bathroom that was downstairs, and you were able to change.
It was earlier than late afternoon. It was well before the breaking of the fast. But
Yes.
It was in the afternoon. Not in the afternoon as at 12 noon. It was closer to like about 4 o'clock or so.
Yes. And indeed, your statement, you say around 5.
4, 5. Yes. Because when I came upstairs, I was allowed a change of clothing, which my family had brought me. To remind my lord, I was stinking of urine after all those days. So I was eventually allowed a shower, but an ice-cold shower. What
day of the week was this?
This was the Tuesday.
The Tuesday.
The Tuesday.
Was the first time you were allowed to shower?
Beg your pardon?
Was it the first time?
It was the first time I was allowed a shower.
So you were brought back up to the 10th floor?
I was
To
brought
the
up back
same
to the
office?
10th floor, to the same office. By now, there was more or less a pattern as to the interrogators that came in.
And can I just ask, the interrogators had changed?
Yes, they
A
had
few
indeed
times,
changed.
or-
Yes, they had changed many times. They had changed many times, but always two at a time. When they wanted to go to another office, supposedly to get statements or bring back information from the other detainees, one would leave, but the other was there. I must emphasize, at no point during that period of time was I ever left alone, except in the actual toilet itself. Tuesday night, those screams became particularly bad. And that's when I thought to myself, if what I'm going through is what I'm going through, I wonder what that person is going through. I kind of was reasonably certain that that person was Ahmed, but I have no way of being 100% sure.
At what time would that have been?
This was now night,
At night.
at night. At one point, the person was crying. Now, this was quite late at night. An important thing, my lord, that I should have mentioned is that the first thing that was done when I was taken to Greyling and introduced to him, on that Saturday when I was taken up to the building of John Foster Square, I was asked to take my watch off and give it to them. Afterwards, I discovered that was to disorientate me. I've never seen that watch again. The only way I could keep time was because of the call to prayer from that minaret from the Newtown Mosque. It was the only way I could keep time. So that's why I knew what day it was. There were no calendars there. Nobody told me what day it was. But as I said, each time that added phrase came on for the call to prayer, I knew a new day had begun, because that's how the new day begins for a Muslim who prays at dawn. So that's why I knew it was a new day. And that's how I kept time, by the call to prayer. That Tuesday, as the night wore on, things became really, really what I would say hectic. And the new guys that came in, the guys being the interrogators, I have no idea what time, but it would have been after the late night prayer, so that would have been after about 8-ish, were particularly vicious and angry and something to that effect. Long after that, I was told somewhere along the line, on that night, that they've made a breakthrough and that they were giving me an opportunity to own up to everything. And it was my last chance to own up. I had no idea what this breakthrough was, except that much later they told me that Teimol had spoken up and told them the truth. Salim Essop wasn't that much mentioned in my interrogations.
You say, what did they say about Timol? You said Timol did not?
They said that Timol had confessed that they had a breakthrough and that I had better come clean. Otherwise, I was in very serious trouble.
Did they disclose the nature of that
No,
breakthrough?
no. I didn't know what to make of this because I was hearing all the screaming from next door. I was hearing all the, some of the crying from next door. I can't now recall sort of hour to hour or anything like that. But that screaming continued.
How frequent was the screaming and crying through Tuesday evening and night?
It got worse as the night wore on. And what I couldn't understand is, if the man had made a confession Why was all the screaming still going on? So you got what you wanted. Let's get it all over and done with. It's finished now. You got your confession.
Was the screaming always from the same person?
The same person, the same voice, the same office. At that stage, I no longer heard any screaming from the other side. It was just that office.
And,
I'm not sure of my state, in terms of did I pass out for a while on that night, but somewhere along the line, when the screaming, by now there was no more crying, just screaming. At some point, the screaming suddenly stopped.
Before we get there, Your Lordship, you had a question for...
Yeah, I just wanted to find out from this witness. This screaming, how did you recognize whose voice it was?
I knew Ahmed Timol well. I knew him well.
You were positive that it was his voice behind the screaming. Were you positive about it, or it was?
I can't be 100% sure.
Okay.
But I would say I'm up to a 99% sure. The other thing is that when the interrogators left the room, supposedly to bring information, when Timol's name was mentioned, it was a brief disappearance. So I kind of gathered from that Timol wasn't very far away. But what happened is, in the early hours of that morning, whoever was in that office, I can't be 100% sure, my lord, that it was Timol, stopped screaming all of a sudden.
Early hours of Wednesday morning.
Beg your
Would
pardon?
it have been early hours of Wednesday morning, you say?
I will locate that time in a moment.
Yeah.
I will locate that time within the hour in a moment.
Yes.
When that screaming stopped, it was so sudden, I kind of thought to myself, poor devil. Anyway, suddenly there was a lot of, somebody came into our office and there was a lot of sort of hive of activity on that floor. With people running up and down the corridor. The office door, the office in which I was left open for people were going in and out. The reason I know the time is, I would guess, about 30 to 40 minutes after this event occurred, the morning call to prayer went out. And I've described on numerous occasions now how I knew it was the morning call to prayer, the different phrase.
And please remind us.
The morning call to prayer has the added phrase, prayer is better than sleep. So I knew it was a new day. I knew it was time to pray. And I knew from the fasting timetable, because we stop eating at exactly dawn. And particularly in Ramadan, the Muslim call to prayer is called out exactly at dawn so that the faithful can stop eating and start their fast. That would have been either 1 minute to 4 or 1 minute past 4 in the year 1971, at that time of the year. That's what the time would have been. I am pretty certain of that. The call to prayer came and went, all that activity came and went, and there was a lot of noise, a lot of everything. And then the office door was locked again. It was daylight.
Just at that time, when you noticed this hive of activity around, did they leave you with someone? Were you with someone in that room?
I was in that office always with somebody.
And that person was not moving. It's just the other officers who were going in and
Yes.
out.
There were changes. There were changes. It wasn't the same person there all the time. There were changes. But there was always somebody there. And my interrogation had stopped, my lord. I was no longer asked any questions after that.
So when that commotion was happening, they decided to cease interrogating you.
Yes.
And for how long did that interrogation cease?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the time. Those offices are south-facing, where we were. It was very cold that October, I might mention. Unusually cold for an October morning, because October is already mid-spring, but it was cold that October. At some point in the course of the morning, I was told I was now going to be resting. I was taken away from the 10th floor and taken to a cell.
So just to be clear, in order to assist us, once the commotion outside had started, the interrogation ceased.
My interrogation ceased. And there was
Did both interrogators remain with you in the room, or were one or the
one
other
or the
coming or
other,
going?
one or the other. And there was a change of shift.
And then there was no more interrogation until you were
None
taken
whatsoever.
to your cell.
And then I was taken to a cell, which was not directly underneath in that building, because we walked across a sort of a gangplank, and it was downstairs. And it was a proper cell.
Yeah. Throughout this interrogation, right from the time of your arrest on Saturday, in relation to the windows of the 10th floor, in what direction were you facing when they interrogated you? Towards the windows, or on the side of the room, or towards the door? In which direction? It varied.
It varied.
And did you notice if at any stage the windows of the office in which you were interrogated were open or were shut?
That's the reason I mentioned that it was particularly cold October.
Yes.
I would say, as an example, just to illustrate the point, June is winter in Johannesburg. It's generally very cold. But I would say, in my opinion, without giving actual temperatures, that this June was a fairly warm June. It wasn't the June I'm used to all my life in Johannesburg. It's usually much colder. So I would say it was a warm June. So October is usually a warmish month going on to summer. That October was very cold. And at no stage were the windows open.
In the room in which you were?
In the room in which I was.
And on that very morning where you noticed this going up and down by the officials, none of them ever went to look at the windows to check in your office whether they are closed?
None whatsoever, even if you, my lord, put it so directly, because I would have remembered if any of those things happened. None of that happened. There was no relationship to the windows whatsoever, except that in the office in which I was, they didn't have the blinds, which I saw this Tuesday when we went for an inspection in loco.
Yes.
Okay. At no point whatsoever were those windows ever open.
Yes, Mr. Van.
Lord, we did start an hour early today. I see it is 10:30. I just wanted to check when you wanted to take the tea adjournment.
Do you need a break, 5-minute break? or we should continue?
I'm okay. It depends on my lord, Mr. Bani.
We normally take the break at 11:15, 11:15. So unless you feel that we need to take a 5-minute break, we can do that. I won't go back to chambers. I'll just be around. But I think we should try and get as much as we can now. And come 11, at least we must have covered some ground. I don't know what was, Mr. Pretorius, what's your take on this? You think we should have...
If we can complete it, my vote, I don't specifically need it right away.
Yes, all the better. Because in any event, I think you had covered quite a lot of ground.
Yes.
We shouldn't be far from completing the evidence.
Yes. Lordship, if the witness is happy to continue, then
yes.
we can.
Yes, that's why I inquired from her whether she would like to have a break. But if she's willing to continue, then let's do that.
Okay.
You'll indicate when you want us to take a
My
short
lord,
break.
I'm quite okay.
Yes, okay.
I'm
Thank
quite
you.
okay.
Thank you.
As the
Proceed.
court please.
Yes, proceed.
Before we continue with the unfolding events, I think it would be very helpful if you were to describe to the court the room in which your interrogation took place. And perhaps let's just start with the size of the room. If you could indicate approximately the size. Was it small, medium-sized, or was it a big room?
Can I just start right at the beginning?
Please do.
Grilling's office was very big. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, it was different from all the other offices. You know, the furniture and everything else there was like that of a very important person. Then, just for the record, I was never taken back to Grilling's office. After that, everything happened in that one office on the 10th floor. The 10th floor office was about half the size of Grilling's office. Looking at the doors I'm facing there in front of me, I would say the 3 doors, including the one that's open, would be the square of that office. What would that be, about 3 meters, 4 meters?
When you say the 3 doors, you mean the 3 panels on
The
the
3
wall?
panels. The 3 panels, yeah.
I think we had sight of the 1026 office. We were able to go in there. Would you say that they are of the same, more or less, the same size?
Approximately, Your Lordship, and we will present to you the actual square meterage.
Yes, we will. Yeah, if you give me that evidence, there's no need for us to estimate.
Yes.
We'll probably get the exact measurement.
And Doctor, if you could just indicate to us, you mentioned there were no blinds.
No.
But if you can tell us the layout in terms of furniture of that office.
My lord, the desk I saw on Tuesday was not the desk that was there. There was much more of a smaller desk there. It was solid wood. It wasn't the one that was there. It was more like a student desk kind of a thing where one person would sit alone. There was one chair there, and then the chair that I was occasionally allowed to sit on was a swivel chair. The cabinet I saw on Tuesday was not there. In fact, there was really nothing else. And then there was one pillar in that office that I saw on Tuesday, which wasn't there. I think those pillars, like the pillars there outside as you're facing the lift, they are all new features in that building.
Just to be clear, the office that you were looking at was in fact not the office that you were interrogated in. Manol, I think we should be absolutely clear on this point that the offices to the right of 1026 were locked up, and so regrettably the witness was unable to inspect the the actual office in which she was interrogated. All right, if we can return to Wednesday morning.
Now I'm in my cell.
Pick up the story from the return to your cell.
Not the return.
Sorry,
My
when you were
arrival.
taken to the cell for the first time, I beg
It
your
was the
pardon.
first time. It was the first time a female officer, that I was in contact with a female officer. This particular officer, may I mention a race,
Yes.
was a black lady. She took me to my cell. It had 3 doors. The one was like a bank vault. The one was, what am I trying to say? Metal rods, a door with metal rods. And the inner door was an ordinary door. And between those 3 doors, there was a space where they used to throw the food in. Throw the food through. The cell itself was much larger than the office that I had been interrogated in. I would say the cell was almost the width of this, the length of this, and up to here. All this would have been the cell. It was fairly large. There was one iron bed on it with a foam mattress and one blanket. And in the corner was a toilet. Against the wall was a built-in, like a bench.
But you were not interrogated or
No,
assaulted in the cell?
I was just left in that cell for the day. That evening, food was brought to me. Nothing was done. I was very, very thankful for all this because it was my first time alone. It was the first time where I could actually lie down, even on an iron bed under a doggy blanket. But I could lie down. And nothing happened for that day. All along, I was trying to recollect my thoughts, trying to think now what's happening, what's been going on. I was filled with, I think the word is foreboding. Something's happened. Either something really bad is going to happen to me because they said they had made a breakthrough. They said Timol had confessed. I don't know what Timol has said about me. I'm in for it now. But at the same time, there were those events that I had ear witnessed earlier in the day, in the early hours of that morning, prior to 4 o'clock. So I was really completely mixed up. On the one hand, pleased that for the first time I'm alone, I can rest. Then again, what's going to happen to me? Then again, what happened up there? Why have I been brought down here? I can't recall much more of that day except that I saw nobody, I heard nobody. I was alone in my cell. This time, now, I could hear 2 calls to prayer. The other mosque is on the other side of the building, is the Kerk Street Mosque. So wherever there are mosques, there are these calls to prayer on the loud hailer, which you can hear quite far away. Anyway, the very next morning, well, that night food was brought to me. I think it was a sausage or something, which at that stage I wouldn't eat because it wasn't halal. My Lord, at that stage I was not as, shall we say, clued up about the intricacies of my religion. Like, under those circumstances, the Quran actually says I can eat anything for survival, that my duty is to preserve my body until such time that I can again eat clean and halal food. But at that stage, I didn't know that. So the only thing I ate was the bread and had the tea that came along with the meal. In the early hours of next morning,
So
that
this is now the Thursday morning.
Yeah, it would have been Thursday. I did not see the wardress that took me to the cell. I didn't see her ever again. The next morning, an elderly wardress arrived, and from her accent, I gathered she was North English, because I know that accent. A little like Scottish. Anyway, I was taken to this sort of a bathroom where there were a whole lot of showers with no cubicles, just showers. It was ice cold water with a bar of soap, the kind that people used to use to scrub their floors with. And I was ordered to take a shower and then return to my room, well, to my cell, my room, yeah. Later on in the morning, breakfast arrived, which of course I didn't eat because I had now decided, okay, I'm out of, what was going on the 10th floor, so it's now time for me to continue my Ramadan fasting. And we'll see how it goes. If I get taken back there, well, God is understanding. I will no longer be fasting, as I hadn't been fasting since my arrival at John Foster Square. But that day I decided I'm going to resume my fasting. So I didn't eat the breakfast. Several days went by like this, where I didn't see anybody. It was just the meals being thrown under the door, the calls to prayer, until eventually, one day, I asked the wardress, did I really, really have to take those cold showers? Because really, my Lord, they were so cold. And I was so exhausted. I was so worn out. I was such a small person at the time. I really found it hard to take. Eventually she asked me, what did you really do to find yourself in this place?
Who was this now?
The wardress, whose name I do not know. And I explained to her that there are all these things, that they're accusing this man of, being a communist, and I'm not sure if he told them I'm a communist. Oh, I told her a whole big story. Anyway, she became quite empathic towards me. And she allowed me not to have those cold showers when I really couldn't handle those cold showers. A few days later, I asked her who the other occupants of the floor were, because I figured, from the rattle of the little metal container of things being thrown on our door, the food containers, that there were more people on that floor in other cells. And lo and behold, I was actually told who my neighbors were. As I would be facing the door of my cell, on my left was Mrs. Desai, and on my right was Khadija Chotia, then known to me as Dija, which is short for Khadija Chotia. I didn't know Dija at all. I'd heard of her. She'd been at a typing college called the Kajis Commercial College, where I'm told that Ahmed Timol had been having envelopes typed or, pamphlets typed or something to that effect. So I knew of Dija, but I had never met Dija. Anyway, the lady was very kind to me, not Dija, the wardress. She brought me extra toilet paper when I needed it. She brought me toiletries, which she said were given to her by Dija, because she had told Dija who I was. And this kind of thing went on. Somewhere along the line, I was then taken back. I'm not sure about the time duration. I was then taken back, but not to the...
Doctor, before you were taken back or taken out of the cells, did you receive, did certain men come
Yes.
to your cell?
Yes. Yes. Two men came into my cell, well dressed. They were not, I gathered, part of this interrogation team. They had suits, ties. They introduced themselves as magistrates. And they asked me if I was okay. I wanted to laugh. Was I really going to tell them no, I wasn't okay? So that they could take me back to where I had come from? That is the office on the 10th floor. Anyway, I told them I was fine. They asked me if I needed anything. They asked me if I was well treated. I asked for a copy of the Quran and a prayer mat known as a musalla. I had specifically asked for a Quran with English translation. The next day...
To be clear, Doctor, the reason why you decided not to complain, if I heard you correctly, was it because you feared that you might be taken back for...
Yes, because I didn't believe that these were actually magistrates concerned about my welfare. I thought this was just another way of getting me to say things that were not true, or, take me back there and torture me on the pretext that I had complained.
I see. Please continue.
They told me that I was in very big trouble. Did I know that? That was before they asked me if there was anything I needed.
They told you that you are in very big trouble?
That I was in very big trouble, and that perhaps I was looking at a very long prison sentence. It was after that they asked me if I needed anything, and this really sounded to me at that time, I'm laughing, but it's not funny, like, your last wish before you're going to the gallows or something like that, that if I needed something. And it was at that point that I asked for the Quran and the prayer mat.
Had they, apart from telling you that they were magistrates, did they tell you that they were magistrates? Or you just thought they were magistrates? These two people, did they introduce themselves?
Yes, they introduced themselves as magistrates.
As magistrates.
If I recall, they told me their names as well, but I have no idea at this stage what their names were. I have no idea. But they also spoke with an Afrikaans accent, which made me more suspicious of, saying anything bad to them.
And they told you that you are in trouble?
That they were?
That you are in trouble and you're going to have a long sentence or something.
What I must mention somewhere here is that along with my dinner, each evening when the wardress came to check, before they did the final locking for the night, they came to check, if you were still there. Well, I don't know what they came to check. Anyway, I was given what I knew to be a Valium, because I knew at that stage what a Valium was, every night. That was in my cell. Sometimes I chose not to take the Valium.
By the warders?
By the wardress. Okay. And then something else happened. May I continue?
Please do.
Yes.
Okay. One day, I woke up finding myself on the floor, hysterical, for want of a better term, swimming in vomitus, full of blood. This was after the visit of the magistrates. How did I come to be in that state? That was my own vomitus, that was my own blood. And the blood had come from self-infliction. I had scratched myself so badly. Why was I scratching myself? This is a very difficult thing for me to say. A really bad trip. And there were all these scorpions all over me. There were snakes around my neck. That's on the trip, not in reality. There were all kinds of things happening to me, and that is actually a bad trip on LSD. I know that as a medical doctor. I know that because long after I became a medical doctor, I used to run a drug rehabilitation program at Coronation Hospital, where I was a consultant physician. I had a really bad trip on LSD. And all that self-inflicted harm, the blood, was whilst I was trying to wrest off these snakes off my neck, which of course were not there in reality. They were there in my mind. I was hallucinating. The scorpions were not there. None of the other horrible things were there. And none of these things were actually asphyxiating me. It was all in my imagination. And I was trying to escape it. I can't remember what happened after that. But I woke up in what I later discovered was the Patu Hospital on a drip. This was shortly before Christmas. I know because there were Christmas decorations all over. I was in a solitary little ward. There were guards outside my ward. There were Afrikaans-speaking nurses there. And they told me that it was Patu Hospital. I have no way of ascertaining or anything that it was Patu, although I knew Patu Hospital because Krugersdorp, where this hospital is situated, it's now called the Yusuf Dadoo Hospital, is not very far from Rudaput, where I grew up. So I knew the area very well. But that's what I was told, that it was the Patu Hospital. I was on a drip because I was probably dehydrated from all that vomiting and all that trauma that I had suffered.
Do you recall how long you were in hospital for?
No, not at all. I was returned to the cell. I was left alone for, I can't remember anymore, a day, 2 days. It was at this point that I asked this very kind wardress what had happened to Essop. He was around. What had happened to Teimol? He was no longer with us, my lord, I was told. I asked, so was he transferred? Where has he been taken to? No, the Indian is dead. Those were her words.
Who
the
was saying
Indian
this to you?
is dead.
Who was saying this to you?
Beg
I
your
said,
pardon?
who was saying this to you?
The wardress, because I asked her where the other people were. I asked her that besides Mrs. Desai and Dija, who else? Were there other women on that floor? No, it's just the three of you. Because the three of you are going on trial and the others are all gone home. That much I knew. But it was the first time I had discovered Ahmed Timol was dead. And that Salim Essop was somewhere in that building. And the others were unknown. May I continue?
You may continue.
After that, I was taken to an office which was not the 9th floor or the 10th floor. An officer wearing a white safari suit with short pants. He always wore the same safari, well, not the same type of safari pants. The short pants and the jacket. He was Patu. And I got to know him quite well subsequently. That office was either on the 7th or the 8th floor, I cannot recollect. All I can say is from that office, I could see the Star Drive-In cinema, which was otherwise in those days colloquially known as the star biscope. I could see that out of the window. Patu sat with his back towards the window. It was a very large office compared to my interrogation office. It was also a nice office, but nothing like Grelem's office. And I was on the other side of the desk always, so I always looked out onto the mine dumps and the cinema out there. I was told that Ahmed Timol was dead. I can't now recall, was it in response to my questioning as to where was Ahmed and what's he saying about me, or was this a spontaneous thing? I honestly cannot remember. But what I do remember is that I was told that Ahmed Timol had jumped out of the window on the 10th floor. That is what I was told.
This officer, was it Patu?
Patu. As I recall, it was spelled P-A-T-O-U and not P-I-T-O-U as is here. I may be mistaken. You know, I cannot...
Is that how he introduced himself to be? Or was it just a nickname or something?
No. That was his real name.
His real name.
I can't remember whether he was Sergeant Patu or a colonel. I don't think it was a colonel, because the colonels generally wore suits. Yes. And were dressed, you know, in suits and ties, things like that. Okay. Whereas my interrogators and Patu, as mentioned, were in safari suits.
Yes.
My interrogators were in long pants safari suits. Patu was always in a short pants safari suit.
How many times did you see him? How many times did you visit him?
How many times did I go into that office?
Yeah.
Numerous times. I can't recall. Because the sequence of events, as I can remember, I was told that Ahmed Timol had jumped out of the window on the 10th floor. Okay? And then I was given this whole sort of how sad it all was, because just when they had got a confession from him, just when things were going their way, the man had decided to put an end to it all, because the communists are like that. They are told to kill themselves rather than give up the organization. I was asked if I knew of another communist who had committed suicide. I said no. I was then asked if I knew about Babla Saluji. I knew about Babla Saluji. But the reason I had said no is that, to my knowledge, Babla was not a communist. I mean, he wasn't known publicly to be a communist.
And this is all in response to questions put to you by Patu?
By Patu.
And Patu alone?
Patu alone. Now I was always alone with Patu. I mean, other people came in and out of the office, but it wasn't like the interrogations anymore. It was more a relaxed, in inverted commas, my lord, because compared to what, you know, the horror I had undergone on the 10th floor. So relative to that, you know, there were no threats of torture anymore. Now Timol was dead, and you know how sad it was and so on. Anyway, the 10th floor story. I sat there and I kind of looked at the ground, and then I acknowledged I knew Babla Saluji, and then I corrected the I corrected Mr. Patu, shall we call him, because I can't remember his designation anymore. And I told him, but it wasn't from here, it was from the Greys. The Greys was the other building before John Foster Square. And I think just about every Indian in the then Transvaal knew about Babla Saluji's fall out of the Greys. Anyway, this little discussion went on about Babla Saluji and how this is how the communists go. The thought crossed my mind, so if Salim is somewhere in this building, how come Salim hasn't gone the same route? But I was in no position to be saying those things anymore.
At that point, did Patu ask you to look out of the window, or was it some
Yes.
other time?
Yes. He took me to the window. I noticed that the windows were closed, that there wasn't a window sill such as, you know, if I wanted to jump over this, I would attempt to hold on here and try and get my feet on here or something. Okay? Also, I thought to myself, I know Ahmed Timol well. I've known him for some years. Ahmed isn't a big man. I would guess, in retrospect, after all these years, he might have been about, in the old measurements, about 5'6". I thought to myself, if Ahmed Timol fell out of the 10th floor window, now these are all just thoughts going through my mind, while Patu was pretending to be, you know, so sorry about the turn of events and things like that, and, you know, we were kind of sitting there very quietly. And I'm thinking to myself, so perhaps I was right, that the man in that office next door to me, those weeks ago, when I was tortured, was in fact Ahmed. And when that screaming had stopped all of a sudden, that Ahmed had been incapacitated in such a way that he could no longer scream. I can't be certain that that was the moment when he had died, but he was no longer capable of screaming. So, furthermore, the thought went through my mind at that time that I, being a woman and being a little woman, was put through that. What were the men put through? If that was the case, how could Ahmed Timol have had the energy to jump out of that 10th floor window? But of course, I was in no position to say anything.
Doctor, am I correct in saying that you made your affidavit before your visit on Tuesday to...
Yes, long before. My first affidavit was made in, I think, April. I think it was made in April. Yeah, and then it was corrected, you know, the spelling and a few facts were corrected here and there. About the week before. The week
Yes.
before
so
we went up.
Before your visit to the erstwhile John Vorster Square, and would I be correct in saying that at the building and since then you have experienced something of a recovery of some memory or a rush of memory of what took place, which is not necessarily reflected in your affidavit?
That is true. That is true. I realized that when I read the statement after I went home. My Lord, I was very, very traumatized on Tuesday. In fact, all that started the moment I found that bathroom, toilet. Because then I knew the orientation. And all the flashbacks and everything came to me. In fact, that Tuesday, I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep. I was in my bed, comfortable, but I couldn't sleep. That after that, I realized that Patu had in fact showed me out of his own window, and he had informed me that Timol had jumped out of the 10th floor window, and somehow I had got this, my wires a little crossed, that I had been taken to the 10th floor. In fact, after that morning of these events that I described, that Wednesday morning, when I was taken to my cell for the first time, I have never returned to the 10th floor of John Vorster Square. It was the first time, my Lord, on the Tuesday afternoon.
And Doctor, if we can begin to wrap up your period of detention, were you asked to sign a statement?
I wasn't asked to sign the statement. I was coming to that. That this whole thing with Patu, you know, it was more like, ons gaan nou gesels, which my Lord translated means, we are now going to have a chat. more or less implies, when you speak it like that in Afrikaans, like, we're chatting over a cup of coffee. He made it sound that way. So in the scheme of things, when we talk about good cop, bad cop, Patu was actually the good cop. I don't mean he was a good cop. I mean, the way people, when they play you one against the other.
His approach, in other words, was different from the interrogators.
Yes.
Okay.
He was the opposite of that. So somewhere along the line, a statement was produced. And I was asked to read it and asked, do I stand by this statement? Is this how things happened? And I was asked questions about things that were written in that statement. I was aghast because I recognized the writing that looked like my writing. I recognized the signature that looked like my signature at that time. But the names mentioned in that statement were those of people, or at least some of the names mentioned in the statement, were names I had never ever heard, and to this day, I do not know who those people are. I have never met them, and at that stage, I had not met them. I have no idea who these people are. In a flash, I realized what had happened. I pretended to be feeling sick. I went back to my cell, and I tried to recollect, and it was then that the whole jigsaw started fitting in my mind. That LSD trip, that statement was probably written when I was in that stage before I had actually reached the stage of hallucination with all these snakes and scorpions and all these things. Because that's how the LSD trip actually proceeds, until you completely pass out.
But of course, in that state, you can't say for certain that statement was written and signed
By me.
by you.
No, the writing looked more like my own. But how could I have concocted names of people that I had never met? If I may personalize it, how could I be talking about members of your family, my lord, when I have not met your family? I do not know your family. I do not know their names. But in the statement, I'm putting down their names. It's just preposterous. It cannot be. Yet, at that time, I was then told that I was going to be charged with treason. I was warned that the others were being charged under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act. I don't know if they actually were, but this is what I was told, that I was going to be charged with treason, and that the sentence for treason was death by hanging, which of course I knew. And the reason that I would be charged with treason is Ahmed had named me as one of the people that was going to overthrow the then government. A few weeks after that, I was released.
Just let's pause for a moment. Your Lordship, it is approaching 11:15. I only require a few more minutes with this witness. With your leave, I'd like to complete this witness before the adjournment.
How many more minutes would you... are you going to be a while? Because I see now...
I would say approximately 6 or 7 minutes.
Is that okay with...
That's fine with me, thank you.
Yes, because I've got to allow the staff to go and do whatever.
Yes.
So just wrap up then.
And perhaps we should check with the witness what time she has to leave in order to get to the mosque.
Yes. What time would you like to leave, ma'am?
My lord, I have since checked with the imam that under the circumstances of the reason why I'm here today, I need not be at mosque today, which I wasn't aware of when I made these arrangements.
These arrangements, okay. Then I think we can take a break and come back your roundup.
As the court please.
Yes. We'll adjourn until 11:30.
All right.
to you while you're on the stand.
One had the commissioner direct members of the who is able to assist.
There were no threats of torture.
Whether those men that you thought were magistrates came back, because there is a record of several visits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, between the 3rd of November and 14th of November. Over here, and these people seem as if they were on their own. Anyway, we're going to have to put this to incidentally, all future witnesses, we should just make a list of magistrates and the times of visits. Yes, I think that's on the list. Is this the fellow who just put in brackets the front so that the judge knows
Instead of that, the commissioner is ordered to
so we don't have an affidavit from her. And surely.
to the extent that
Please find out, because I don't know who these people are. I don't put up names that I can't talk to. Find out who they are. At the moment, I think they're probably going to be. Or let's just say we haven't consulted as yet. Have you checked this list with Frank? Please check it with Frank, because I want to make sure it's correct. Please check with Frank that this is correct. You can return to the box.
All right.
You are still under oath, Doctor.
I'm still under oath.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Mohammed.
As the court pleases. Doctor, you were about to start talking about your release. I just have one or two questions to put to you, and then we will return to the release. Doctor, in terms of the total number of interrogators who questioned you from beginning to end, would you be able to put an approximate number to how many interrogated you?
Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday. In the course of about 4 days, I would say between 16 and 20. It would have to be an even number because there were always twos. Now that's the interrogators on the 10th floor. That I was never interrogated by Patu, so Patu doesn't count. I was never actually interrogated by Khreiling, so Khreiling doesn't count. And those are the only two names I can recall. But
And
just by the change of shifts,
yes.
I would imagine there would be between 16 and 20.
But just to be clear, Doctor, of the 16 to 20, would some of them be repeats? In other words, the
Yes.
same people?
Yes, some of them were repeats.
So without counting the number of repeats,
Shifts.
Without trying to come up with the exact number of shifts, would you have an idea at least of the number of interrogators as in specific
At least 10.
individuals?
At least 10.
At least 10.
At least 10.
Next, for purposes of clarification, you mentioned that you were visited by men who described themselves as magistrates.
Indeed, it happened.
Were there any other occasions when magistrates or individuals purporting to be magistrates came to you to inquire about your condition and any requests that you may have?
Now that I recall, I requested textbooks and things like that, which of course were not given to me. Now that was at the point where I still thought, I was going to be walking out of there before I was informed that Timol was dead, and so on.
So you can confirm that there were magistrates who from time to time would come to you
Yes,
in your cell,
in the cell.
and you were then able to make certain requests.
Yes,
And this was done on a periodic basis.
on a periodic basis, but those requests were not necessarily granted. As an example, I repeatedly had asked for a Quran with English translation. Those exist. Arabic with English side by side, which was never granted to me.
And you have explained why you decided not to make a complaint about your abuse
Yes,
in relation to the first two men who came who said they were magistrates. Did you make complaints about your abuse on the other occasions?
no, never.
And can you explain to the court why you didn't?
I did not trust anybody there anymore. Well, I retract the word anymore. I didn't trust anybody at all. And I always had this belief within myself that this was some sort of a ploy to trap me. That these were just guys playing the good cop to me, that all they wanted was for me to say something bad about the other guys or to try and get something out of me which I wasn't willing to give, some information or something like that. And I kept asking myself, so you say you're a magistrate, how do I know that you are a magistrate? How do I know you're just not one of those guys from the 10th floor now dressed in a suit?
That's what you ask yourself.
I asked myself.
You never asked them that question at any
No, I
point.
wouldn't dare. And then, that first time, when they asked me, do I realize I'm in very serious trouble and that I may be facing a very long jail term? I thought to myself, so now this contradiction, you are here to see to my welfare, but at the same time, you are giving me a warning about what my fate may be. I just didn't trust anybody. Even the wardress was kind. It was kind of her, to bring me the toiletries, to tell me who was next door. In fact, on one occasion, I'm not sure how, but in any case, the fact of the matter is that Mrs. Desai did indeed have the Quran with the English and the English translation alongside the Arabic. And it may have been in response to, what am I eating, what am I doing kind of thing, to the wardress, that she had sent me her copy of the Quran with underlined in red the portions where the Quran says that when you find yourself in dire circumstances, you can eat even pork, which the court may or may not know is totally forbidden to Muslims. But you have to eat it in order to preserve your body. She had underlined relevant passages, and there were some other passages about truthfulness and so on and so forth that she had underlined in red pen. And that Quran was brought to me by the wardress. Yet I didn't trust the wardress.
Thank you, Doctor. Before I interrupted you, you were about to describe your release, which according to your statement was at the end of January of 1972. Could you describe the process of your release, please?
On several occasions, I was told I was going to be released. Prior to my release, after being shown that statement, which I insist was not a statement I would have made, whilst I was sane, compos mentis and sober. It's not a statement I would have made, because I don't know the events or the people in that statement. I had been told that my mother had passed on from a heart attack. Later on, I had asked Mrs. Desai via the wardress, did she hear anything about my mother having passed away? And she hadn't. Ruraput was a very small community. People would have heard. Anyway, when they told me I was going to be released, I asked them, well, you'll have to first take me to my mum's grave. This was followed by laughter from Patu, because my mum wasn't dead. She was very much alive and well and waiting for me. So several times there was sort of false, shall we say, almost dangling a carrot in front of somebody, that you're going to be released, but it didn't materialize. One day I was just told, pack your things. That was a bit of a joke, because all I had in my cell were my Quran, the prayer mat, and what I was wearing. Just for the record, after my given place in the cell, in other words, put into the cell, I was given clean clothes fairly regularly. And after my hospitalization, they were always white clothes. When I got home and I asked my family about those white clothes, they told me that a batch of clothes had been returned to them, which appeared to have been washed, but they found traces of blood on those clothes. And they had no idea, how that blood had got to be there. They suspected something horrific had been happening to me in prison, so they insisted on sending me white clothes to wear so that they would pick up the blood very quickly. Anyway, so it was the clothes I was wearing, my prayer mat.
Just on that point, and apologies for interrupting your train of thought. You have testified that there was an incident in which you had scratched yourself under the influence of drugs, and that blood had been emitted, and do you believe that that was the blood that was left?
It wasn't that outfit had been washed, but not thoroughly, because there was so much blood, the way I had scratched myself. Anyone who has witnessed, even on a television screen, a bad LSD trip would know something about it. When it's bad, it's bad.
And in your view, does that explain the blood on the clothing that
I think so.
washed?
I think so.
Thank you.
I think so.
Please continue.
So after that, there were only white clothes. And I later learned that my parents had approached Helen Suzman at the time to try and find out what was in fact going on with me. That's just as an aside. Anyway, after about 3 or 4 times after being told I'm being taken home, and then after, this laughter when I said, before being taken home, I want to be taken to my mum's grave first, because it would be me that she was pining for, and indirectly I had killed her, because I was the cause of a heart attack. My mum didn't have any heart problems when all these things happened. And afterwards, it all turned out to be one big lie. My mum didn't have a heart attack. She was alive. She was well. Anyway, I was taken to Patu's office. I was asked to sign a discharge. I was taken into a car, and I was taken to a sort of I'd call it a takeaway, where they sold hamburgers and hot dogs and things, to that Star Biscope that I was looking at all those weeks. And I thought it was quite obscene, because Patu offered me a burger or something. I may be mistaken, it might not have. Anyway, the point is it was meat. Now I wouldn't eat the meat because, according to me, or my belief, I was imminently being discharged, I wasn't hungry, and I was going to be going to halal food. So that food was no longer allowed to me. Anyway, we sat in the car. He bought himself something. I had declined the cool drinks that he had offered me, and we chatted. And I was asked to become an informer. And the ploy that was used on me was something that they had picked up at the university. I feel a little embarrassed to say what I'm about to say.
If it's too embarrassing.
No. It's just, I was voted one of the 10 best dressed women on the campus. It's embarrassing for me now. Now, the importance of that is, in particular, he offered me a sort of, shall we say, free ticket to go and shop at the best shops in Johannesburg and pick up the best clothes. So it was quite clear that they had been doing a lot of homework on me. That part I find embarrassing, to sort of say it now. But that is what had happened. So, in my life it was a big deal at that time. And there was all this, the white and non-white politics at Wits and all that kind of thing. But let's leave that aside. The point is, he offered me particularly an open ticket to go and buy clothes. Anyway, I said I would think about it. And the only reason I said that I was going to think about it was my eagerness to be really and truly free in my own home. So anyway, I was taken from there, minus Patu, by the 2 officers, because we were initially 4 in the car. Patu was in the car, I was in the car, and the 2 other guys were in the car. I was taken to my home. My dad wasn't at home, he was running his business. And in fact, my mom was the only person at home when I arrived home. And I couldn't believe what I saw because I was told she was dead. She couldn't believe what she saw because she thought she was never going to see me again. So that was how I was set free. However, there was, shall we say, a spike in the whole deal. Because I returned to university, which opened early in February. I was compelled to write the exams, for which I wasn't prepared. And of course, after all these events, whatever I had learned in second year, I was in no state. The dean threatened me, with kicking me out of university if I didn't do the exams. So I sat the exams and I failed, which wasn't such a bad thing for me, because I was guaranteed by the then Vice-Chancellor, Bazoli, that wasn't going to happen, that I was going to remain in the university. The only thing I was warned of is 50% is the pass mark for everybody. For you, Dilshad, 60% is the pass mark, because if you get 52, they can easily change it to 48, which means you failed. However, if you've got 60, it can't be changed to 50. Bazoli did not tell me directly, but I figured out there's some sort of collusion going on here, between the powers that be, the special branch, and the university people. Anyway, when I got back to university, I had to repeat the year, and part of the second year studies is where there's a human cadaver, and we used to be 4 at Wits University. There were more at other universities. 4 students around a cadaver to dissect one cadaver. 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. Nobody wanted to be on the same cadaver that I was allocated to dissect. Suddenly, I had no friends. I was a boisterous person. In the common room, I had a lot of friends. Suddenly, I had no friends. Nobody wanted to share coffee time with me. Nobody wanted to throw darts with me. Nobody wanted to play table tennis with me. In short, I was isolated. After that, every now and then, I would be picked up, say, on a Friday afternoon from medical school and taken to John Foster Square. Held there for a few hours. And the silliest things, like what I had for lunch on Monday, Tuesday, would be told to me. The significance of that was, all the time, your friends are our friends, and if your friends were not our friends, you wouldn't have been where you were. So it was a constant threat that I was being watched. These kinds of threats went on for many, many years. All kinds of things happened until I found myself in London. I was in London for very personal reasons. One of the reasons was I was on my way to India on an elective period of 3 years, where I was going to study how they treated TB in India. Because at that time, India had the highest rate of TB in the world. That's tuberculosis. I also had very intensely personal reasons for being in London, which does not concern this inquest. Anyway, I was outside of a place called the Golden Egg, which is a meal place like the Wimpy or Nando's or things like that. I was waiting for the individual, a close friend that I was supposed to have met in London. Whilst waiting for him, a man speaking Afrikaans came up to me and greeted me and asked me in Afrikaans what was I doing there and who was I meeting. And I was just reminded, no matter where I went around the world, there's no place to hide. And the person walked away.
Doctor, during the course of 1972, an inquest was held into the death of Ahmed Timol. Were you asked to testify at that inquest or make an affidavit?
No, I was not.
Could you tell us about any particular impact that you endured as a result of your detention and the abuses that you sustained?
With your permission, may I just go back a little?
Yes, of course.
I was threatened with a charge of treason. I was threatened that I was going to be hanged because it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to be found guilty of treason. I was reminded that the others were being charged under Section 6, as I've mentioned earlier on in this evidence. I knew by now that Ahmed Timol was dead. There were 3 other people, if I remember correctly. The one was Salim Essop. The other was Amina Desai. The third person charged, I don't know. I don't know the third person. And at the time, I didn't know the third person. But I'm supposed to have implicated that third person in that statement that I was confronted with. In the interim, my dad had got experts from America to prove that that handwriting was not my normal handwriting. And it was agreed between my family and I that no matter what the circumstances were, I come from a line of people who live the way we live. And no matter what happened, I was going to retract that statement because it wasn't true. And if I was going to hang from a rope till I was dead, so be it. It was agreed between me and my parents that if that was the way my death was meant to be, so be it. So I left home on the day of the trial, or on the day on which I was to have given evidence, at the old synagogue. I think it was called the Palace of Justice at the time. I bade goodbye to everybody, thinking I was never going to see my family again. My family had an advocate holding a watch and brief. All this had cost them a fortune in terms of money. Getting, the experts to deny that that was my writing and my statement, and then having this. In court, I retracted the statement verbally. And all I can remember of that day, I can't even remember even looking at Amina or at Salim. And the third person I don't know. All I remember is the moment there was recess, the advocate, whose name I cannot recall, grabbed me by the arm and we went out the side door. There was a side door of the synagogue at that time. So that is what happened. So that statement was retracted. And it's obvious I was never charged with that treason, and I'm here to give the testimony today. As a result of all these goings on...
So just one question on the trial of Essop and Amina Desai. Did your father have your statement studied by an expert?
Yes, indeed.
And that expert gave evidence?
No, not in the court itself.
Submitted an affidavit?
Yes.
And what did that expert conclude?
That was not my normal natural handwriting, and that signature was not mine.
Thank you. What transpired after the trial?
I was taken away by our attorney, shall we say, through Swaziland by various devious routes. I was taken to Durban by agreement. And I then stayed with an aunt at a very obscure place called Shongweni Hills. It's in part of the 1,000 Hills in Natal. It's about 30 to 40 kilometers away from Durban. It's between Durban and Pietermaritzburg. My mom's eldest sister, they had a little shop there. They called it a general dealer in those days. It was remote, there were no lights, there was no running water, there were no telephones. And my parents thought I would be safe there for a while. So I stayed there for a while and then came out again after the trial was over and continued my studies. But I continued to be hounded by plainclothes men. My personality, there are some things that have become really etched in my personality. To this day, I can never take a cold shower. I can never swim in cold water. I only swim in warm water. I only take warm showers. I can never eat in a metal plate, even if it's made of real silver or gold-plated, because of the plates that used to be thrown. I still become jittery when I hear clang of metal doors. And under certain circumstances, I still find it very difficult to trust people.
And Doctor, notwithstanding everything you went through, you became one of the first female cardiologists in South Africa.
Indeed, I did. And saying those things about myself, I find a little embarrassing, like telling you that, I was one of the best dressed women at Wits. Yeah, but yes, I was. I was the first Muslim physician in the Transvaal, and I was the first female cardiologist in the country.
Your Lordship, that concludes. Is there anything else you wish to add?
What I would like to add, my Lord, if you will indulge me,
Yes.
is just to state why it is that I have kept total silence for 45 years. I have never discussed all these events with anybody. The first time I saw Salim after that court appearance at the old synagogue was on Tuesday afternoon, I think in your presence, when I first met him. It was the first time I set eyes on him. When I was first contacted by the Human Rights Commission to give evidence at this inquest, I agreed, because after 45 years, I decided I have to say what I have to say. I feel very, very strongly, my Lord, that there should never be extrajudicial killings in any country whatsoever, all in the name of trying to keep certain people in power. That where there is a law, people suspected or accused of doing things that are contrary to the law should be brought to court and allowed a trial, and then let the law take its course. That is my firm belief. I also hope and pray that after all that we've been through, after all the hurt that collectively as so-called non-white people that we have suffered, like I couldn't initially go to Wits until I went to the tribal college and, did very well and skipped first year at Wits and got into second year. Perhaps I was just a bit of an exception. But for the rest of us, we couldn't live where we wanted to, we couldn't do the things we wanted to. But now that we have freedom, the price that we have paid, I'm lucky I have survived. I'm here to tell my story. Salim is here, he has survived. Ahmed is not here. He has paid with his life. I honestly hope and pray that this country of ours never reverts to such barbarous means or methods to suppress opposition in any form whatsoever, now or in the future. That is all I have to say, my Lord.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes.
That concludes the evidence issue.
Thank you. Mr. Johannes?
I don't know if I can do anything better than that was said now, Dr. Jeffen. I just read in your statement, paragraph 53, I was released close to the end of January 1972. My father insisted that I write down everything that I can remember. Did you do it, Dr. Jeffen?
Yes, I did.
You still have the notes?
Some of it I have, The rest of it was left in Shongweni for safekeeping because of the remoteness of that place and because it was really, really out in the Bundus, and we honestly believe nobody would ever get to anything over there.
While you're talking of Shongweni, I didn't fully understand. You were to give evidence at the trial in Pretoria, and then you recounted that statement. Did they do a Section 189 inquiry when you slipped out of the court? Why did you go surreptitiously to Swaziland? Can you just explain what happened there?
Well, I went through Swaziland, through the Piet Retief border, which I think is called, I can't remember the border. That was the way to enter Natal, okay? Because I felt if we are followed, you know, there was always this fear that if I didn't run away, I was going to be picked up. I didn't know what my next step was going to be. I didn't know if my parents were going to be able to get me out of the country somehow, somewhere. It was a ploy just to buy me some time. That was the reason for going there.
Thank you, Michael. That clears up.
Is that all?
Thanks.
But Mr. Sturas, before you sit down, I quickly checked on the list that was provided by Captain Nell of the police that were involved. I can't find the name of Peter. Could there have been such an official?
Yes, my lord. What was handed in yesterday, when I went through it yesterday, I got the full names of this person, because there's another Patu that I know from crime intelligence, but in yesterday, A3 and A17, they refer to Speersergeant Hendrik Cornelis Patu, Veiligheidslag John Foster Plain. That investigation into Professor Knights.
Okay.
There's a statement apparently also of this Sergeant Patu. In the Near-Addict inquest, I know I've been informed by my investigator that he has investigated, and unfortunately I've been informed that this Patu is dead, is deceased, my lord.
Oh yes, Pastor. Okay, but there was such a person.
There was such a person, and as I say, when I went through, I got the full names of this person, Patu, yesterday, that was handed up to you in Professor Knights. That evidence about his hanging and that they investigated. So there's the full particulars of this Patu.
Yes, I haven't gone through them in detail, and I will do so. So that is all.
Thank you.
Yes. Doctor, we have come to the end of your evidence. I must thank you very much for your evidence, and I've listened carefully to what you said, especially at the end, in regard to where we're going as a country with this past behind us. When I opened these proceedings, I pointed out that this evidence that is now unfolding is going to be a journey that is going to cause us as South Africans to confront the past. And this with the intention, obviously, to make good the future. I've listened to what you have said, and then I will take note of it. Thank you very much. And,
Thank you, my lord.
You are excused.
Thank you, gents. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the end of the first week of the hearing here, and we are going to adjourn because it's recess. Some of my colleagues are already gone. It's recess today. The High Courts go on recess. They will resume, I think, in the first week of August. But we are going to continue on the 24th of July. It will be recess still, but we will continue with the hearings on the 24th of July, and that will be in Pretoria. On the 24th of July in Pretoria. We expect additional witnesses to come, and hopefully those that have also issued subpoena, in particular the police that were involved in the interrogation. We are hoping to hear their evidence during that period. And anything that you'd like to raise, Mr. Vani, before we take the adjournment?
Nothing further in open court, Your Lordship.
Yes. Mr. Pretorius?
Thank you, my lord.
Yes. Ma'am?
Nothing.
Nothing at this stage. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We will adjourn until the 24th of July, 10 o'clock in Pretoria. We adjourn.
All right.